Fáilte, welcome to a week in the life of a Gaelic writer. Usually I record these videos on a Friday, but this week I have waited until the Saturday so that I could tell you about the Stanza Poetry Festival, which is where I've been today. But before I do that, I am going to remind you once again, because I've been talking about this for months, that my new book is about to launch. It's just 2 weeks away now. Ballach Big a Geistigek Dorsen, The Little Boy Who Listened at Doors, is published by Lua Press, and we will be launching it on Friday the 23rd of March at 6 p.m. at the Mitchell Library in Glasgow. It's part of the I Write Festival, and you can get a ticket for that event and all the other I Write events through the website, which I will link below this video. Do come along. I would love to meet you. I always like to meet people who've read my books. It's, as you can imagine, Gaelic fiction is a fairly small market, but there are some very keen readers out there, and it's always lovely to meet people who've read stuff I've written, who've enjoyed it, who've got questions about it. So if you want to come along and hear about the new book, please do. That's in Glasgow in just under a fortnight now. Also information about that on my website if you want to click through the links to iWriter there as well. So Stanza is the St Andrews International Poetry Festival, and it's been going on all week, well since earlier in the week, and it finishes tomorrow. But I went up today to have a look around, see a couple of events, and also to meet up with David Eyre, Davy Eyre, Joe Harrichgo Hanan Davy agus Skrivetar Arling. I have had the pleasure of editing one of David's books, a fiction book, but he also writes poetry, and he's a journalist by trade, and so he writes in all sorts of forms and in several languages. So he has been, during this festival, he's been writing in Scots and English and Gaelic, and he has also been collaborating with a Frisian writer. So they wrote a poem that was, one side of it is Frisian and one side of it is Scots. They collaborated on that together while the festival was going on. He was also showing me a poem that he's been working on while he's there in his capacity as a writer in residence at the festival, which is English on one side and Gaelic on the other, and drawing inspiration from one of the martyrs who was burnt at the stake in St Andrews. St Andrews in the 15th century was not a very safe place to be if you were a heretic, or some of the early Protestants were. They met a grisly end at the hands of the church. So David's attention was caught by a plaque commemorating the martyrdom of this particular Polish religious reformer. And there are several places in St Andrews where the sites of martyrdoms are marked in the streets. I always love going back to St Andrews because it is my alma mater, and it's good to go back occasionally, even on a horrible, wet, soggy day like today, and to have a look around and take a little trip down memory lane. So we also saw two performances, which were, there was a poetry reading by a Frisian writer and an Irish writer, Tara Bergen, the Irish writer, and Said Bringer. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, I'm probably not. But I have to say that of the two performances we saw, I preferred the other one. It was much more of a performance poetry event rather than simply a reading, and that involved two poets, one called Ulrike Almut Sandig from Germany, and another called Maud van Houwert from Belgium. She writes in Dutch, and her poems were also being, the English versions of her poems were being performed by Katie Hale. So the three of them together made a very lively performance, and then we had a slightly more sedate reading later on with the other two poets. And there's so much going on. If I'd been able to stay all weekend, I would have loved to do that. But it was good to get out of Edinburgh, good to go to St Andrews, good to think about work in other forms that I don't generally employ in my own writing. You know, I'm occasionally moved to verse, but not often. I'm much more comfortable as a prose writer. But it was good to do that, and I think it's a great event, the Stanza event, more power to them. And everything sold out as well, as far as I could see. Everything was full. So they seem to have had a very successful festival, and I think I think Davy has enjoyed it too. It's a strange sort of responsibility, I suppose, to be a writer in residence at a festival. You've got to produce something while the festival is happening. So when we parted company this evening, he was going to put the finishing touches to that poem about the martyrdom. So yes, it'll be great to see the finished result. So va oavsett med Davy Eichking and Jew ma vi rash an in Killariving. And it's sort of, yes, it's refreshed me, it's made me think about other stuff that I want to write, and a little break from some of the stuff that I have been trying to work on and not succeeding very well. So yes, back tomorrow, back to the usual, back to the writing and translating and the prose and the next book and all sorts of things like that. So that's where I am this week. Man hoorst me leor uur farw, an ballach beke geistig ag dorsen. Ma ha shuv ag airite, ma ha shuv am a glas of who hickes can hello. Can ich leor, mi dyn gyrig yn can ich dyn I leor. Agus gus sa feich mi rhys yw yna hiach goin a mi dochus gybi 4 jo hiach goin ac y fwlig.